This is Motivation. I'm Laura Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And we're celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride.
In the world of motorcycles, target fixation occurs when a rider becomes overly focused on something they perceive as dangerous or distracting. Instead of avoiding it, they end up unintentionally steering towards it or other hazards they may not have initially noticed. Similarly, in life, we often find ourselves fixating on things that don't serve us. We get caught up in constant or repetitive thoughts that revolve around perceived mistakes, negative situations, or even self-criticism. This cycle can have a negative impact on our mood and drain our energy significantly. On today's episode, we're going to delve into the topic of ruminating thoughts. We'll take a closer look at what they are, why they occur, and most importantly, how you can break free from the cycle. By disrupting the pattern of rumination, you can ensure that your energy is directed toward things that truly benefit you, rather than being poured into something that holds you back. This is the Motivation.
All right, folks, today we're talking about rumination, which we have all been there. There is no one that is, what's the word? There's no one that can escape it or is invisible to it. You had a word. I saw you. What was your word?
I was going to say immune to it.
No one is immune to it. No one is immune to rumination. We've all been there. And why I say no one's immune to it is because it's a part of a bit of our wiring, right? Like other animals don't ruminate on the past or the future. They're in the present moment. We as people, we have the capacity, but it's also in many ways a curse to our lives if we're not aware of it and we don't catch it and we're not a participant in it. So today we really want to talk about it further for ourselves to just something always comes up for Chrissy and I when we talk out loud, but for you, the listener, because maybe you don't have that much of an awareness that you're even doing it, or you're just like, it's a throwaway thing of I was ruminating, or I'm ruminating, or you might not even have an idea that you are. And first and foremost, just to have more of an awareness of what's going on for you and where you can be more empowered in that. And so I want to kick it off with reading just a quick thing on one of the definitions of rumination, which it's the focused attention on symptoms of one's distress or uncomfortable feelings. And then you focus on its possible causes and consequences as opposed to solutions or kind of accountability on our part. And even when I say accountability on our part, I mean in a productive way and in a gentle way, because we can ruminate also on what our part is, but we do it in shame. Oh, I said that thing again. I did that thing again. Oh, I always do that thing. I'm embarrassed of that thing. But essentially what happens with rumination is we have this uncomfortable feeling. And because our brain is wired to be a problem solver and a storyteller, we smash those things together, but we focus more on the outward of who made me feel that way? What has gone on? What did I do wrong? But we do it in the discomfort of the feeling, trying to make the feeling go away. And when we do that, it's the monster that feeds itself. The more we think and try and problem solve and tell the story, and it's them and it's that, or it's me and it's this, in the feeling, that negative feeling or discomfort builds and builds and builds because it is fed with this thought process. And then it just becomes this kind of little tornado of rumination. And we do it all throughout our day in small scales and in large scales. And essentially what the payoff is, temporarily in that moment, is it's a coping mechanism to take, it's their fault, it's not my fault, or, that's just who I am, I can't do anything about it, but the shame spiral sort of thing. But the thing that it steals from us is a tremendous amount of energy that we could be putting elsewhere. It further pushes us into this groove of negative thinking and hardwiring our brain into jumping to those conclusions, the most, unkindest version of a situation. It also takes away all our power, because if it's all of their fault or I'm this horrible person, well, what power do I have then to make actual changes? And it affects us actual taking action that's productive. Because we might take action of like, I'm going to tell them to go fuck themselves. I'm going to go tell them what a piece of shit they are. I'm going to go tell them they have to change everything about themselves because for me to feel to me to be comfortable, right? And so it's this thing that we constantly get in the trap of because it's part of our it's part of our wiring is that negative bias, thinking all the above. But when we have an awareness around it and then we have a toolkit or we have some things to implement, it doesn't have to be a continuing theme. We can catch it. We can get ahead of it. It might always crop up to some extent in our lives. No one's, again, immune to it. But you definitely can understand it and then get a practice in place so that it's not such a formative part of our lives, which if you really pay attention even to outside people, you hear it all the time in the language we use, and you watch it in family members and friends and ourselves, is that rumination state.
Well, and you're really right that if you're just focused there, it can create that analysis paralysis too, where
Yes.
you just are completely stalled in that space and then you just spin in it and you're 100% right. There's zero action at that point. There's no way that you're going to get out of that thought process because you are feeding it. And I almost view it like you're in the garden, just like throwing seeds out because you keep feeding it and feeding it. And then before you know it, you're stuck in the fucking weeds you grew. And it's not even the first weed that popped up. Now you have other shit coming at you. I have a really good example of this because I'd like to think that I'm pretty well practiced in catching myself in this. Like a lot of the things that you say, I actually don't necessarily resonate or relate to in a huge way, but obviously I'm not immune from it either. So I've definitely gotten myself in traps. And I have a good recent example, not even to do with other individuals, but when you create things for yourself and you have to face the consequences of your actions. So in my profession now, my expenses are something that I decided to keep on my personal account so that I could get more flights home. I have a points card. So I was like, this is perfect. I have a strong aversion to numbers and Excel spreadsheets. So before you know it, it's been several months since I've submitted an expense report and I've had a fuck ton of expenses. Well, anybody that's good at math or things like that, you're going to pay interest. So now I'm like, and I'm very frugal. So I'm like, cool, I'm paying interest on money that isn't even mine. And I take it on the chin then at that point being like, well, you're an idiot. That's the consequence for the fact that you didn't take action in the thing that you didn't have to do. And then it becomes that thing on the plate that you should just cross off the list. But of course, now I'm in this procrastination cycle. So I don't. And then I start thinking about it. And then it starts to bother me because I haven't taken action. And then it becomes the thing that I focused on. And the minute I started focusing on without taking action, guess what happened? I got a parking ticket and found out my Costco membership renewal thing was due in the same day, which was like, poof, like just extra unnecessary money. Not a mammoth life changer, but I quite literally said out loud to my husband, I was like, yep, that's the universe telling me to get my ass in gear over this stupid little thing I haven't done. And so that's just a really granular example of how,
it's a great one,
we
though.
said it before, where your focus goes, the energy flows. And if you are focusing and just creating that same thought pattern, I think personally, and I mean, it's proven, we've talked about manifestation before for the good. It's also going to attract more of what you don't want. And a lot of times, if we don't catch ourselves, we don't even realize we're doing it. And people double down. Then it's the woe is me. Everything's happening to me. And it actually just creates something that's even harder to climb out of because you've exacerbated this situation where you're standing in the weeds that you actually planted and nurtured those to grow.
Yeah, that's a great example because it's one of those things where it's an everyday life kind of situation where you don't even see it coming. Like it wasn't something that necessarily kicked up from the original discomfort of feelings. What kicked up is your aversion to numbers. And so along the way, it came to be. And I think from, what are we, 4 years into our friendship of like that, I would agree. You I think whether it was a bit of a more of a natural tendency, a coping mechanisms from early childhood that you spoke of, or, but yes, I don't think you are someone that catches rumination quick from everything I've seen and that move through it and move on very quickly. I myself was a deep ruminator, deep ruminator. And again, up until only a few years ago was when I started to better understand these things within, how the mind works, and then catching it within myself and then the tools. But here's an example of like how deep of ruminating I'd get. Amazon had dropped off a package and they delivered it to the wrong door below. And I realized this because they take a picture of the door and I'm like, that's not my door. I realize it's a door below. It's now I don't even know how much. Oh, I go down there and it's gone from their door. So they've obviously taken it into their home and opened it. And I also realized that like, they obviously know that they haven't ordered this. And then you would look on the front to see, like, this is what my brain's going. And then I've gone, well, what have they done? I'm a little miffed that I don't have my package. It's in the thing and they're keeping it. So I write a note on the door and I say, hey, my packages got delivered to your door. It's this thing. Here's my phone number. Give me a call. I don't hear from them. Now, keep in mind, this package was $12. $12.
That's not where I thought we were going. I like this.
And yeah, this is just going to show you the audacity of my rumination, because the more obvious are the friend that said the thing to me, the family member that did the thing. And then that's an easy one, right? Because you feel so justified in it and stuff like this, right? But I want to, so you can only imagine the rumination that I do on that end of the scale. And so I went downstairs, and as I didn't get a phone call, minute by minute by minute, I got more and more angry because of the principle of it. Now this person stole from me. And like, how dare a person steal, and like, aren't how, the awkwardness because they're my, they live below me and all the things. And like, it was metal straws.
Thank you for helping the environment.
Yeah. And so the cap of the story is, after I'd say about 4 hours, I felt fury. Like I felt so, and I recognized that this was ridiculous, but I also didn't have the awareness to the level at which I would ruminate, because everything became justified. And that's the thing too, right? We justify why we're feeling what we're feeling. And it's the part of it that why it's so hard to get out of it versus clicking in of like, whether or not it's justified or not, you're ruminating. This is going to get you nowhere. And so the interruption of it, but like, even just things of now going to more of the deeper, the relationships or the friendships or the things that we often ruminate on, of an interaction that, a friend said something, like I said, or a family member said something, or they did something out of line of what your expectations are. And man, it would run so much of that relationship. And the thing of it is when you're creating your storyline, your experience, we're all having a completely different experience in this life, because you had a different upbringing, you had different actual experiences, your gender offered different experience, the color of your skin offered different experiences, family, like we are all literally having completely different realities within what's being fed to our brain, therefore projected into what we think is reality. So every reality is different in your relationships. And then I go off and I create a whole new reality from the one that just happened by ruminating. And then I take that and I come back into the relationship, and that person's done the same thing. And so there's so many disassociations. There's so many made up crap that's creating this heavy, intense emotion. And then we bring it back into it. And then that person's looking at you like, what the fuck are you talking about? Sort of thing. And then and it's all the stuff, right, that comes into place. And that's just it too. When you sit and you ruminate, you take whatever your original reality was, which was a bit distorted to begin with, because, to the situation potentially. And then you just build it and you build it and you build it. And you're so far from what the present moment actually is. And the closest thing you could possibly get to, like the mutual reality between you and the person, you and the neighbor, you and the thing. and it becomes so distorted. And so how do you even have a clarity around how to move forward? Well, how do you even have any realistic version of what's your next right step? Because you've just spent, the last half an hour, sometimes days, sometimes months, creating something so grand that you don't even know where to begin to find what's the next right step.
Well, and it's almost like playing a game of broken mental telephone. We've all played that game, and we all know when it comes out the other side, it's never how it started in the first place. And then a lot of people try to take action out of that place. And especially when it comes to relationships, I think a lot of times we take on a lot of responsibility, thinking or feeling like it's our right or our job to control the outcome of what your relationship or blend with another person is supposed to look like. And often when it comes to interactions that maybe weren't the most favorable, we tend not to look inwards first. Like, not to say that and discount people's ability to take ownership and accountability, but a lot of the time it's what they did and how they made me feel. And the more and more you stare at whatever you felt the injustice was of the moment, you tend to build upon that too. Then all of a sudden you're picking apart and finding flaws, and this person's done this. And then the next time, like, maybe you don't even address it with the individual at that moment. And then when you're spending time with them after, you're carrying all of that with you and really presenting yourself from this new reality that you've created. I think that's where a lot of dysfunction happens in relationships, when you can't have a healthy conversation around it, and you've built something so big. That's really, I still always go back to that. To be clear is kind, to be unclear is unkind, because I loved it so much. The person that you're dealing with has no idea that's where you're coming from, because you have built this mental infrastructure of something that absolutely isn't necessarily taking place in this reality. And it can be an absolute runaway train. And it is so true, because we are so practiced, because we do it in grand scales of relationships. We do it when, I liked the example you used earlier. How many of us have been in situations where, maybe you put your foot in your mouth, or you said the wrong thing, or like a moment, an unchangeable moment, like those ones that you can't take back. And I know there's probably people thinking, my mom would be a great example of this. She'd always say, well, I don't think like you. I can't just not care and let it go. And I'm like, it's not that I don't care. It's an acknowledgement that, yes, this happened. Now it is in the past. What have I learned from it? And then leave it there.
Yeah. Or if there is action to take, there's action to take, what accountability can I take?
Yes.
What's the thing that I have to take accountability for and then move forward? And in our home was the same, and I think it's a generational thing in a big way, because I know it's something that comes up really often with a lot of my friends and their parents, is the lack of accountability, but just the rumination and I didn't do this for you. I'm sorry, I wasn't good enough. When they hear your words and you're like, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm not saying this to shame you. I'm saying this because the patterns continue. And I'm trying to communicate that, like, please, can we do it in a different direction? And that's all I want is to move forward. But then it's like, but the same dynamic over and over. And that generation seems like a huge one in the rumination of just like ruminating on the past, or like it didn't work out that time. Why would it ever work out again? I'm just not going to try. Or, like, I've tried that once. When? 15 years ago. What? So what? And we're just going to not again. And the stuckness in what was, and the fear of moving into the future, because it's so because of the rumination of it all. And so I grew up very much in a family that was a ruminating family. I didn't know any different. I didn't know how to move out of it and get out of it. I had no skill set. I had nothing to go off of, super, super kind people, super loving people, super like you show up for everything people. But in regards to actually, like, how do you move out of something? If you were in a state of discomfort, how do you reflect on what is taking place and then take action around it? And that's the difference from ruminating and reflective thinking. And also, it's extremely hard to do reflective thinking when you're in a tumultuous state emotionally. And that's usually what throws us into the rumination or the anxiety thoughts or anything, is that discomfort. Something's kicked up saying that really hurt my feelings, or I'm really uncomfortable, or I'm really embarrassed, or whatever this discomfort feeling is, right? Because we're trying to find control in the ruminating, the thinking. And first and foremost, when you're in that state of this like emotional discord, your brain and your higher faculties and your problem solving, your empathy, your all those, that's shut down, or that's shutting down, because you're more in a state of survival. And so your higher thinking actually can't do that, because our first and foremost for our brain is like, you survive and then you learn. Like that's the order, whether you like it or not. And so you first and foremost have to like become just like, woof, I'm having a real difficult, uncomfortable feeling. And whether that's moving or doing something to alleviate the emotional discourse that's happening, you cannot think your way through and think your way out of that emotional discourse unless you are in some kind of clarity to some extent, because then maybe you could say like, hey, that person's having a tough go to, or blah, blah, blah. But when I'm in a state of anger, that's really tough. When I'm in a state of shame, that's really tough. And so you have to first alleviate that before you can even go into a reflective state. And you can't think yourself out of rumination either. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. Stop doing that. Because then it's like saying, don't think of a pink elephant. Chrissy, listeners, do not, whatever you do, stop thinking of a pink elephant. What are we thinking of now?
Mine had polka dots, but yeah, same.
Gorge, pink. The fucking pink elephant, So it's that thing of like, there's all these things that we feel shame about the shame that we're feeling, and all the, and it just is this, like I say, the monster that feeds itself. But yeah, like my parents' generation, or my personal experience was one in which, that's why I really didn't recognize it. And why I also, this is the thing that I have to really, what I need to work on now. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I'm not immune to rumination. It still happens, but I can catch it so much quicker, and I'm so much more practiced at interrupting it and saying like, whoa, whoa, whoa. First and foremost, just come to the present. Just come to the present, because at the end of the day, I'm coming from a place of my own experience, which is like egocentric, and I'm placing it on them. So whatever it is also that's pissed me off about that person, a lot of it has to do because of like how I think it should be and go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, something that's going to piss me off, Chrissy, it wouldn't even be on your radar. Or if it even was, you'd, or recognizing that like, yeah, that might be directed at me, but it's not as personal as it feels. That's something that they're rocking. That's something that they're doing, sort of thing. Right. So it's remembering that it's that place of ego from myself. And also that's likely more to do with them than me anyways. But it's the catching and all of things. I'm not immune, but I'm so much more further advanced on the road of catching it and being aware in those things. What I do have a very difficult time with now, because I'm so scared to go back to where I was, is like when my mom or family members or friends are ruminating in and around me, I feel so quick to be like, ain't participating. We ain't doing it unless you want solutions. I'm not your guy. Like I'll hold space for like maybe 10 minutes. But after that, I'm like, all right, well, what are you going to do about that field? What are you going to, and then they're, that look of like, I don't want to do anything about it. This isn't my responsibility. And I'm like, well, I'm definitely not your person to sit with you further on this. And that can feel like rejection, which also then makes them feel worse about, and only lends to their rumination. And I'm really working on this. It just happened with my visit with mom, where like there was rumination going on things. And I was just like, hey, like the words you speak, the things you think, they are the tether to the action you're going to take. They are, and it hurts my heart, because she then gets very hurt. Because then it's like, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm disappointing her. I'm not saying what she wants to hear. And I'm going, I'm not looking for you to say what I want to hear. I'm looking for there to be an awareness that like there's a different way. There's a different way. It doesn't, but it's tough, because I find that my patience is not there for it quite yet. But that's because, again, me personally, I'm afraid of falling back into that state of mind, because I realize how debilitating it was for so much of my life and destructive.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot. And it's kind of an aha because I think almost there is a resentment probably in me too, because I do kind of just want to be like, why don't you just not think like that? Because it really is such a waste of fucking time. I have such a good example of something, again, bless moms, but same situation. My mom was moving to Halifax, got all her big belongings packed up because from the time her place was going to be ready to when she was moving out, there was a lull that things had to go into storage for about, let's say, 3 weeks. And she realized after the fact in her chest of drawers that she didn't empty out her like passport and important documents. So they had been like properly packed to move across the country and placed in a storage that was going to arrive in the new place. And I get a call and she is in sheer panic. My stuff is in there. Someone's going to find it. They're going to steal my identity. Like the levels that this situation. And I was like, I've just picked up the phone on a dog walk, having a beautiful morning where I'm like, whoa, okay, like, let's slow it down for a second. Let's like take 5 steps back and be like, so you're saying the odds that somebody would go in, unwrap all the saran from the thing, it's going to be somebody that's going to open that particular drawer. It's going to be somebody that wants to steal an identity that just happens to work at a storage facility. Like, let's just explore how difficult it is to get to that created reality you've created for yourself. She refused to step out of it. And so I'm not kidding. I was getting panic calls every day a week. I haven't slept. I haven't done this. So then there was like this victimhood that I was expected to feed because she was in such turmoil over this passport.
It's tough.
And it got to the point, I did lose all patience. I said, I will hang up the phone. And this is not the right way to handle this, by the way. But I was like, if you call and like speak of this, the conversation is done. I'm not doing this unless, because I said, we can A, go to the storage place, B, like presented all these solutions, no interest in taking any of them. Then I was like, no, then I'm not doing this with you anymore. And bless her heart, she stopped talking to me about it, but I know spent those 3 weeks just beside herself because in the aftermath, when she's reunited and everything was fine, she was like, oh, the relief coursing through me. I'm like, 98% of the stress you created from that situation was made up. It was make believe.
Yeah.
And it is really difficult to watch somebody do that. And I mean, that's just about a passport and an imaginary identity theft. We do this with really serious things in our life too, because awful things do happen. And it's really easy. I mean, we just spoke in an episode 2 episodes ago about, the melanoma situation with my husband. And like, it would be very easy to live in the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
That is such a punishment on your well-being. And again, in those 6 weeks waiting for results, it's not that I was immune from thinking the thought at any time. It was catching it constantly and doing all the tools that I knew and foundations, like right down to like, let's make sure I'm eating well. Let's make sure I'm exercising. Let's make sure I'm listening to the things. Like, you have to take action to avoid going to those spaces. But I'm like, thank God I didn't live in that. Well, I would have wasted 6 weeks of my life living the worst case reality in my mind. Life is short. Why? And I get this is like a habitual behavior for most of us.
Yes,
I'm not trying to like shame you into thinking like, why do we do this to ourselves? But out of exasperation, why do we do these to ourselves?
Yeah. And that's just it. It's like, it's not shaming because we do it. It's trying, the passion comes because it's like, it's such a life changer. Here's somebody that's created the skill set from a young age and is able to, Chrissy gets shit done very quickly. I know you think you're a procrastinator in certain avenues, you are, but it's like in the avenues, it's like kind of like, well, who cares? There's such minimal consequence, but in regards to where it matters, you are not a procrastinator. And that's because I think you recognized from an early age that like time and being present is and likely, like you said, because of your dad and his illness at, when you were young and his passing, of like, there's no time to fuck around. Yeah. And also watching the paralysis that happened within your family as well. And that's where I learned it from myself too is like, I watched adults become stuck in the what was, through divorce, through, what life was before kids and after, all the things. And it was one of those things where it was just like, I would make big life choices and not get stuck in the rumination of like just going for it. But where I got stuck was the emotional rumination in and around relationships. And it really is. And then from someone like Chrissy, passionately saying just like, it's so worth it to have, tools and work through it and move through it and get on the other side of it as soon as you can and not let it, take control. And then someone for me that's a recovering ruminator, a lifelong recovery is that, the amount of time that I have and energy that I didn't have, that I didn't realize I didn't have because you really only have so much time in a day and so much energy in a day. And every time that I am lending my brain power and my body power, because I say brain power because your mind and your body are so interconnected. You have 20% of your caloric intake is from thinking in a day. And so where I am thinking about is what's sending also the chemical reactions throughout my body. It's the things that are, lighting up different cellular activity for illness and health by my thinking. And my energy is being either depleted or energized. And when you are in a state of rumination, you're in a very restricted, intense thinking state. And that takes a lot of energy, and not energy that's also then feeding itself. And so you wonder why you're more exhausted in the evenings. You're wondering why you're more irritable. You wonder why you're more, because it's not just in that relationship that you are now also turning on gene expressions and stealing energy. It just goes into so many different avenues. And so when I also catch myself, I also kind of do the thing where I'm just like, whoa, you're ruminating, like you're doing that thing, calling it out, like naming it to tame it, as Dr. Dan Siegel would say. But also I recognize that I'm like, is this really where you want to spend your energy? Because you got some work to do with joy in the home. And either you can do this, that's going to progress you. This is going to pull you back. So what is it? Like, you're going to spend some energy. Is this really where you want to do it? And I'm always like, oh my God, no. Like, like I literally have that talk with myself. You going to do this? This is what you're going to do today? So where are you going to spend it? No. Okay. So what do you need to do and it's not that easy just to say, well, I just won't think about it, because it's obviously heavily on your mind, all those things. But then again, it's like, and maybe this is, well, I don't want to preemptively do this. And so, but like, we'll talk about that in our motivation madness, but I don't want to cut it off in case there's more thoughts, Chrissy, that you have on that, but just how much, just that of like, you have got to understand that every time that you slip into this state of mind and you allow it to perpetuate itself, or you are not a participant in the counteracting of it, you are giving a shit ton of your time and energy, which is so insanely valuable, to this disempowering train of thought.
I really love what you said there. And it kind of comes full circle to how I begun this, and the fact where I said you're spreading the seeds to plant some weeds.
Yes.
And anybody that has built a garden, it's a lot of time, energy, watering, nurturing, and all the things. And so it's exactly that. You're spending energy to create more dis-ease for yourself. And on the flip side of that, something that I've actively been working on, honestly, just this month, is the understanding, because on the complete other side of that, I think, is our creative flow state. And I know how great those flow states feel and how fluid things move. And I've really been actively reminding myself that that's accessible at all times, but I have to like choose to seek to invite and create that for myself. And so I've been trying to take a lot of action around that. And to be honest, now I'm several weeks in and I'm really feeling it. But what you're robbing yourself of when you do what Lori is explaining there is exactly that. You're spending all your energy in the other direction. And it's completely like, you have to kind of think of cause and effect and what you're losing. Not only are you spending all that energy and you are more tired, like, trust me, if you've joined this podcast for a while, you heard what it was like when I was in my former place of employment and knew something was wrong. And like, I would get stuck in situations where I was only focusing on how toxic things were around me versus mapping the solution to come out of that. I was napping a lot more. I definitely was tired. My mood was shit. I was irritable with other people. Like, there is a cause and effect. And not only are you living in that space of generally negativity, if we want to use a blanket term, on the other side, you are robbing yourself from access to that flow state that really is an available element in our lives that we could plug into at any time. So you really have to step back and evaluate of not only what you're deciding to live in, but what you're robbing yourself of. So you're embracing, when you decide to allow this remuneration to continue, you're embracing a complete decrease in your life force.
Yeah.
And you're actually draining the battery even faster. It's like having every tab open at all times so that the fucking thing dies faster. And you're just like, that's not the way that you're going to be able to create the life you want. It's just not. And the sooner that you're able to break up with that behavior, even in a small little way, you're going to be able to open up way more doors for yourself. Like, all the solutions to the problems you've created aren't by staring at the problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And to even just take that from what you just said and your original metaphor around the garden, to even just add a little bit to it, is like, genuinely think of it as like the things that you're doing in your day to, build beautiful, positive moments in your day, whether that's like, sorry, I'm jumping to like meditation and stuff, but I want to make it more, like whether you're doing gratitude, spending time with friends, really being more present in your relationships, all those things is planting the seeds for flowers and all the different plants and the beauty in your garden. And essentially what rumination is the weeds, and what you said, Chrissy, about the weeds, planting the weeds. And what do weeds do in a garden full of flowers? They take over and they choke out and they kill. And that's the biggest thing that I noticed too, was like, when I was doing a lot of self-work, but I wasn't completely aware of my rumination, I was very confused because I was doing a lot of things that I was feeling good until I wasn't. And then when I wasn't, it completely took over anything and all the work that I had just originally done. And now it was almost like a deep, dark cloud, just kind of like that came over. And I was just like pulling it in. I was just, I wasn't even running. I was like, come on, let that storm.
Give us some thunder.
And so, but it really is. And so when you can pull that weed and think of it as like, the weeds are going to come to some degree, but if you can get it at its root and you can stay on them and pull them at the root, you're going to have this gorgeous garden. And you're still going to have to be on it. You're still going to have to catch because something flies in from somebody in another person's yard that's got weeds everywhere, and that comes into and then just, if you're just, whoop, there's a weed, there's a rumination. Let me go pull it from its root. And when I say pull it from its root, that's where you have to recognize that once you're emotionally more at a regulated state, that's when you step into the reflection state. And then where do I have to take accountability? Is there a conversation that needs to take place, or am I maybe just being too sensitive? And I'm putting my discomfort and dis-ease onto them because they said that one thing that hit wrong. Do I need to recognize that, like, I'm scared to move into a future or take steps because I got burnt the last time? But that was also 10 years ago and I was a different person, and it's a different, it's all those different, like, recognizing from a clear state. And that's how you get it out from its root. So it doesn't keep spreading, kind of thing. Right. Rather than just being like, well, I'll just try and like push the dirt over. Well, that seed's gonna,
I love how full circle this happened. Truly.
Yeah.
We didn't even plan this metaphor.
We didn't even plan.
But it does sound like Lori planned her motivation.
Maintenance. I kind of did it, but I don't usually. They usually just pop. They should just pop on up. No pun intended. So I'm just going to give the one that I learned. When I say I learned is like everything when I now I just go to like, okay, what's happening in the brain? What does the psychotherapist or psychoanalyst say? And I go from there. And essentially what it is first and foremost is like acknowledging what's happening. And so just saying out loud for myself with like, whether in my head or out loud of like, oof, I'm ruminating, I'm hyper focusing. I then allow myself the decision or choice. Is this where I want to spend my time and energy? And it's always no. Like I'm always like, because that's the reality is like, that empowers me because it's an empowering thought. And that's what works for me is very empowering thoughts. And so when I recognize that like either this runaway train's going to be in charge or I'm going to be in charge. And when I'm in charge, you know, in my more conscious state, then that gives me so many more options. Then is my subconscious going to allow? Because then I'm just kind of at the mercy of all the made up stuff that's going to continue. So awareness, first and foremost, I'm doing it. I'm ruminating. The second step is having the choice. Is this really where you want to spend your energy? Is this really what you want, the road you want to go down? And I'm always like, absolutely not. And so before I can get to a space, I need to take care of myself emotionally because I need to let the energy and motion, which is emotion, actually move through me so I can have some clarity. So the prefrontal cortex clicks back on. So I'll do a little dance. I'll do a little something. If I'm in public, I'll just like take some deep breaths or go, you know what I mean? Like something to just alleviate the nervous system and just be like, hey, I'm safe. All is well. It's not such a big fucking deal, whatever it is. Because as long as I'm still breathing on, it's actually not that big of a deal in this moment in regards to it's no more important than taking care of self. That's the most important thing. So I do something to alleviate that. Once that genuinely is alleviated and I do a scale of 1 to 10. So when I start, I'm like, ooh, where are you at? And I'm usually like, I'm like a 9. I want to kill the person. And then I do not allow myself to do any problem solving, reflection or anything until I'm a 4 or under. When I'm a 4 or under, that's like where I might be a little agitated. I might feel a little like miffed, but I'm not in an emotional state. I'm not heightened enough that I can't think clearly or think of their perspective. And so that's when I look at like, okay, sometimes it takes me like an hour. Sometimes that takes me 24 hours. Sometimes it takes me 48 hours, you know, usually about the 48-hour mark, I'm emotionally moved completely through it. I've got no big attachments in that regards. And I'm able to think more clearly. And then that's when I decide if action actually needs to be taken or if this is just something that I need to reflect upon and absorb and move on with. So it's kind of the step of awareness, choice, move through the feeling. And then once you're at a regulated state and calm and your higher faculties are back on, then it's reflection and action.
So mine honestly is just like a presence exercise because you nailed it. I 100% am somebody who really values how my time is invested. And you know, maybe to a degree you could look at it and be like, it's a bit excessive how much I think that way. But truthfully, if I do a life audit, I'm like, well, I feel good about it. So when I am feeling, you know, even if it's something as stupid as an expense report I need to do and hop into Excel, or if it's an interaction that didn't go well, whatever that thought is that's trying to take real estate in my brain, when I go, I have a dog, so it's an even bigger excuse to go for walks, but I highly recommend walking is one of the best things that we can do for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I will intentionally on that walk, look at the trees and be like, see how intricate the bark is. I know this sounds so ridiculous, but I'm like, look where the moss has grown on the side of the tree. Explore how symmetrical the leaves are. And I guarantee you, if you take that little inch of space in your brain to just bring yourself to that level of presence, and trees are fucking awesome. Like I am quite literally that person that will walk in Mount Pleasant and touch a tree as I go by, but almost the thing in my brain so is like if somebody's behind me being like, act natural, just brush it lightly so it doesn't look weird. Like I'm like, I just need to like connect to this thing right now because they're rooted in so much knowledge and goodness. But honestly, like try a presence exercise. It doesn't necessarily need to be a tree, but I do recommend it being something in nature because it will bring you to this moment. And truthfully, no matter what's happening in that life, if you allow that space, even in the chaos, it's like a little moment of being like, I'm okay right now. I'm okay in this moment. And that can actually ground you to that little piece of clarity that you might need to take the next action step that more than likely is going to take a little bit more work, because one thing we didn't talk about, but any behavior change, we know this is going to come with resistance, because if it's the way it always was, everything in
It'd be
you is
easy
going to
to
be
do.
like, nah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, you're
Too much
like, I
work.
got this. And you're like, do you? Because you usually, throw a grenade in, you think you have it, and then you grenade the shit out of it. Like,
100%. But I'm like, you are going to come up against that. So I'm like, that is such an actionable small step to just bring yourself present, because that is
yes.
life's happening now. Life is happening as you were listening. Life is this moment. We keep being under this illusion that life is something that we're waiting to happen to us. We're in it. We're moving through it. So just remind yourself of that.
That's just it. Like, my piece is once this thing goes away. Your piece is actually looking at the tree and touching the tree. Like, it's the truth. Your piece actually lies in that, because the big myth is that we can multitask our brain. We can't actually. You can switch very quickly between things in your brain and your focus, but you can't actually hold two thoughts at the same time. You can't actually properly focus on two things at the same time. And so if you're what you're talking about is so crucial and important and helpful, because if you're focusing on the leaves and the trees and the bark, and I can say from experience that this is one of the key ways in which I break rumination, is this type of thing of like, it can also be looked at as like meditative walking. But what you are is you're bringing your brain to the present moment, but you're also focusing on something else, because you cannot focus on the thing that pissed you off. And if you're not focused on that, you're not having the thought, therefore you're not having an emotional connection to the thought. So it's also breaking up that emotional duress. And so it's one of the most helpful ways in which you can interrupt that, because there's that thing of like, there's a difference between distracting yourself and becoming present in the moment. When a lot of times when we try and distract is when we constantly find our way, because we haven't actually interrupted it. We're trying to almost run from it, the thought. And the thought's like, you can run, but you can't hide. And then you go to sleep and that's all you can think about in your sleep. Exactly. And you're just like, oh my God, you have to actually do the processing of it in regards to, like we said, interrupting the thought, recognizing what it is, creating a different version, whatever that looks like. But the walk and awareness is a good one. Even sometimes I'll look out my window when I catch myself and I got to do it quick, and I'll walk, because we live up quite high. So birds, I'll watch the birds swoop, and just watching the birds. And that also makes me recognize how ridiculous it is because I'm like, birds fly.
I say this
there
all the time.
There is a creature in the sky that is flying past me right now. And I'm worried about the Amazon guy, or the guy that took my Amazon straws. And there's a bird, a creature soaring in the air.
I say this all the time when I see birds.
Lori.
I'm like, what is, like, we just accept that they exist, and it's so funny. But then I'm like, oh, we accept that we exist too, and that's pretty wild.
And so that's why you're just like, you step outside of it. You're able to just kind of like pull the lens out before you re-pull it into the actual reflection. And, it's kind of like zoom out, back to zoom in, but zoom in where it's healthy coping mechanisms and problem solving and moving your life forward.
Beautiful. Do you have
quote time?
Quote time.
I found super shitty quotes about this. I hope yours is better than mine. Mine was.
You know what's funny? I didn't prepare, but I actually keep this at my desk.
Oh.
Like a real ripped
in perfect condition. Mint condition. I see.
It's actually funny because basically after my dad had passed away, I ended up getting a scrapbook from my grandmother's when she passed away too. It was like the most valuable thing in the house. It's funny. Other relatives thought all the other shit was valuable. I'm like, have at her. But this was within it, like in a folder of my dad's stuff. And I was like, it's no doubt why I think the way
Let's
that
just do that one then.
But it's like, it's relevant and not at the same time, but it's called thinking. If you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win but think you can't, it's almost a cinch that you won't. If you think you'll lose, you're lost. For out in this world we find, success begins with a person's will. It's all in the state of mind. If you think you're outclassed, you've got to think high to rise. You've got to be sure of yourself before you can ever win a prize. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster person, but sooner or later, the person who wins is the person who thinks they can. And so it's just kind of a reminder on what I was saying before, that you are robbing yourself. And I'm not talking success when it comes to like money, career, because if you know me well, that's not the things that matter to me. The successes lie in your relationships with people and how fully and how present you're able to show up with them. And it all comes up into how you think and your mindset. And you are robbing yourself from your ability to think that you can have all of those things if you're only focused on those elements that you're remunerating about that do not serve you.
Absolutely. Which the quote that I was going to say is perfect for what you just said just now, of worry and rumination are the enemies to living in the present moment.
And I do want to say that I stumbled on that quote because I had to replace the word man because this is from like
Gorge.
1960s piece of paper. And so apparently only men were successful back then.
Right. Only man.
You know, a lot of that.
Well, my friends, that is your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your hosts, Chrissy Van and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
And thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And remember, tanks full, full throttle.